Welcome to the 5 o'clock show. It's time for Common Sense. Now, it's Katz and Cosby with John Catsimatidis and Rita Cosby, standing for truth, justice, and the American way, bringing common sense to the world. Now, here's John Catsimatidis and Rita Cosby.
Bye-bye love, bye-bye happiness, hello loneliness, I think I'm gonna cry.
Well, who's dying?
Well, we'll see. The Democratic Party might be.
Who's crying?
The Democratic Party.
Is it Kamala Harris crying, or is it President Biden crying?
Well, bye-bye love. Boy, I will tell you, John, that press conference yesterday was definitely one for the record books. There was bumbles and jumbles, but he said he's not going anywhere.
I think he did much better than people expected him to.
Well, the whisper. He whispered and he screamed. It was every emotion.
He definitely has a problem. But he's getting old before his time, because I've seen 90-year-olds that are much better. I've seen 86-year-olds that are much better.
Absolutely.
He definitely has a problem, and I'm not sure he can make it for 4 more years, but it's not. It's not to make fun of the president. I think
it's a sad situation.
It's a sad situation.
I agree. It is sad.
Governor Patterson, what say you?
Well, they said they were going to have a big boy press conference. So I kind of imagined a press conference where he's right in the middle of the media and they're firing questions at him, and it's raucous, and it's kind of like the press conferences that you see governors have from time to time, or Richard Nixon used to have some real rowdy press conferences. And I know Ed Cox can attest to that. But then when they hold it at NATO, he's standing up there like he's giving the State of the Union speech. And then it's like, oh, by the way, I guess you all want to ask me some questions. And then the names of the reporters were on a card that he read. So there wasn't anything really authentic about it. It was scheduled. And
in other words, he specifically went to certain reporters, and I saw that. I don't. You think the reporters, or he had the questions given to those reporters?
No,
I don't think so. You guys, I don't think so. But what I do think is they could have been a lot tougher, the media. I think they could have asked some more. What I thought was weird, we have a song, actually.
I think they were pretty tough.
I thought they were
Ed Cox,
okay.
New York State Chairman?
Yeah, look, I would agree with Richard Haas, the chairman emeritus of the Council of Foreign Relations. He actually, although the words were sort of jumbled, no doubt he understood the basic concepts, some intricate concepts of foreign policy. So it gave him a forum to come across and show his mind.
He lives another
and with
day.
respect to the most important thing, the president. Now, I disagree with him where he comes out, but he understood the basic issues.
He did point out, I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah, no, and by the way, John, how he said it, we have a song, actually. Hold on a second. Here, we have a little song. Governor Patterson, you got to do the impression when he said, I'm not going anywhere.
I'm not going anywhere. Donald Trump is not going anywhere either.
No, he isn't.
We're going to postpone the
Judge
election.
Weinberg?
I think for those people who expected him to implode and make it easy on the Democratic Party to yank him off the stage, they were very disappointed because he held his own.
Let's go to one smart guy, one common sense guy. Rita, introduce Bill O'Reilly.
All right. We have the great Bill O'Reilly, of course, the host of Common Sense with Bill O'Reilly every weeknight here on WABC Radio, 9 to 10 p.m. Mega best-selling nonfiction author. Bill, what was your reaction first off to the big boy press conference as it was billed?
That was the worst performance I've ever seen of journalism on the national level in my entire 50-year career.
I agree.
Those reporters, I would have fired every single one of them had I been the head of their companies. They did not zero in on specific questions asked in a simple way. And we went over it with Sid yesterday. Before the press conference, I've got 10 of them. Like, Mr. President, on your watch, there have been 36% more drug deaths in the United States. Why? Mr. President, 3 years ago, you assigned Kamala Harris to find the root causes of illegal migration. What did she report back to you?
I don't know.
That kind of stuff, you know? So what they do in the White House Communications Office is this. They have a meeting. They know who's going to be in the room to ask the questions. They decide beforehand who will be called. They do that based upon sympathies. So there was a French reporter that they knew was very pro-Palestine and would ask a question like that. And so Biden was prepared for that question. They called on a couple of reporters who hate Trump. They knew that they would get a hate Trump comment in, and that would take the heat off Biden. So Joe Biden may understand in general terms what's happening in the country and the world. I can't say he doesn't understand that, but he cannot process information. I'll give you one very clear example. So when Richard Haas, who's a liberal Democrat, by the way, and should be identified as such, he's identified as this big shot foreign policy person. He always comes at it from a liberal point of view, 100% of the time. So he said, no. Biden, very clear, very good grasp of foreign policy. Let me just quote you what Biden said yesterday. Is Putin ready to talk? I'm not ready to talk to Putin unless Putin is ready to change his behavior. 3 paragraphs later, Biden says, I think I'm prepared to talk to any leader who wants to talk, including Putin, if he calls me and wants to talk. That's in the same answer. The man does not know what he is saying from one second to the next. Now, people get people's names wrong. Okay, he calls Zelensky Putin. Unbelievably embarrassing, but it happens. Then he calls Kamala Harris Trump. Then he doesn't even hear the mistake in his head. Doesn't hear it. Whereby most of us, when we make verbal mistakes, we hear it and then correct it. Right? He doesn't hear it. So at this point in our history, in American history, if any American pulls the lever for Joe Biden in November, and I still don't think he's going to make the ballot, you're voting against your family and your country because this is not going to be the president. All right? Even if he wins, he's not going to make the 4 years. So you're voting for Harris, who's more dangerous than Biden.
How can, it seems complicated. How did Joe Biden right now seems like he says, I'm not leaving. Harris is the heir to the throne if he does leave. And a lot of the people that pledged money to them are now saying, we want our money back. Our pledge is no good because we're not buying what we expected we're buying.
Well, careful with that. So the New York Times wants Biden out because they hate Trump so much and they have calculated that Trump could beat Biden. Okay. So they've editorialized twice that Biden has got to go. This is the New York Times, the leading liberal newspaper in the country. Then they convinced George Clooney to write that op-ed. Clooney didn't call them. They called him. And before Clooney wrote the op-ed or had somebody write it for him, that's more likely, he called Barack Obama, and Barack Obama signed off. We all know that. So today the New York Times comes out and says Democratic donors are holding up $90 million to Joe Biden because they don't trust him any longer. It's all anonymous sources. There's not one name attached to the article, which is what the New York Times does. So I don't particularly believe that, John. It could be true, but going forward, it is how anybody could fund this Biden operation, knowing the man simply cannot do the job based on what he's already done, which is create havoc on the border and in our economy. And I mean havoc. When your gas prices are up 35% and your food prices are up 23%, that's havoc.
Food prices are up more than that, Bill.
Yeah, and you know because you own the food.
Yeah, well, I know what I'm paying for it, too.
Yeah. So that's havoc. on working Americans. Don't tell me inflation's going down or it's Trump's fault.
Well, I'll tell you, a lot of the supermarkets, a lot of the drugstores are losing money because the price of the product went up. We raised the price, but the factor that nobody realizes, security problems, shoplifting used to be 1.5% of sales traditionally. Between extra security and extra shoplifting, that number's up to 6%. So you can't charge enough for the product to make up that difference.
And that's an urban problem. In Casper, Wyoming, they don't necessarily have that.
Wegmans is closing up 2,600 stores in the whole country, and they're in every place.
But I'm a simple man. Okay, was there one question in that press conference about the price of food? One? No, there was not.
I don't think he realizes that. He's blaming that we're making a lot of money and he's raising prices. We're actually losing money.
The greedy corporation. But John, he doesn't care. He has never cared. He wants power. So does his wife. You're not dealing with a politician here who actually cares. That's the argument the Democrats make about Trump. But Trump doesn't care. It's all about his self-aggrandizement and him being in the spotlight. But if you look at real wages, which is really the only economic indicator that matters in this country, that means wages that you take home pay. They were up almost 8% under Trump despite COVID. They're down under Biden. And was there one question about that? Real wages? No. That press corps in there, I mean, believe me, I know what I'm doing. You guys know that. I know what I'm doing in the world of journalism. That was a disgrace.
Bill, by the way, Bill, also border because he lumped it in.
They let him ruminate about meeting with the president of Finland in his office. Who gives a fig? Who? People in Helsinki? And this is what you get? And then today you have to listen to all this garbage about, oh, Joe Biden made it through. Oh, hey, could have made it through that press conference. And he would not have screwed up Kamala Harris with Donald Trump, the 8-year-old.
I agree, Bill. And to your point about the press, they should have asked more poignant questions. He went in the same answer where he said, listen, inflation's down. The economy's better. I'm the one who sealed the border a sense. You know, it was Trump who did, and they didn't challenge him on any of that.
But the worst was this. The one specific question that was asked are you going to take a cognitive test from an independent physician? And he goes, I take a test every day. Well, you flunk every day. Okay? If that's the test, hang it up and go to Delaware. Because you're the second worst president in our history. And if you look at the numbers, he is. Because he doesn't really care to solve any problem. Let me ask the panel. You guys are all smart. Has Joe Biden solved one problem? Give me one problem he solved.
Well, let me go to the in-house Democrats here. We have Governor Patterson and we have Judge Weinberg.
Give me one problem Joe Biden has solved. One.
Dead silence.
I'll take the fifth.
Governor Patterson took the Fifth Amendment.
They solved one problem, the Biden family wealth problem.
Yeah, all right. But you know what I'm saying.
Make the Biden family wealthy again.
I cannot disagree with you, Bill.
If you had a legitimate press conference where the press was actually interested in bringing information to the American public and providing perspective, you would ask that question.
You know, Bill,
one major problem.
Hold on, Governor Patterson is about to respond.
Yeah, you know, Bill, we were talking about this before. When I heard it was going to be a big boy press conference, and I've seen these press conferences where the focus is on the candidate who's in the middle of it and people are firing questions at him. This press conference was on his home court. It's, at NATO. He's standing up as if he's giving the State of the Union speech. And only after 35 minutes does he let the press even talk. So I thought that it was so organized.
Yeah, manicured.
Manicured. It was just set up so that he couldn't feel. And then on top of it, that the few people got to ask questions really didn't ask any hard questions was the real problem. But I think the worst thing that he has said is that only the Almighty can stop him from running for president. So then clearly he sees himself as being spiritually superior to the rest of us.
I didn't take it that way, Governor. Joe Biden is going to say what he's told to say. He always has. And they're telling him now dig in, and particularly his wife. He would have been out of there a long time ago if Joe Biden had any perspective or any feeling for her husband or the country. And I know that's harsh. But to put through that man who obviously cannot run the country through this grueling criticism, and he's not going to make it. I mean, there'll be more and more people once they start the internal polling, which shows right now that Biden's behind in every swing state. This Marist poll is bogus today. Ignore it.
Yes.
Okay? The Pew poll has Trump up by 4. But more importantly, you have to understand the population centers of California and New York and Illinois give Biden a close race. The Electoral College is not close. That's why and Ron Klain and the others, even though Klain's playing a double game now, okay, that's why they want Biden out, because they're looking at the electoral map, and they're going, Trump's going to cleave off 4 or 5 of these states. Biden's not going to get a single vote in the Bible Belt or in the Middle West, except for Colorado, which is totally insane now. Okay? So we got to get him out of there because we're going to lose.
Bill O'Reilly, we got to go on to a break. Thank you so much for coming on, and I hope you have a great weekend.
Bill, thank you. We love you. Thank you, Bill.
Thanks for having me,
I
guys.
think we take one right now. All we can do is take one day at a time and see how do the British say it? Things sort out. How do they sort out?
We'll see for the country, right? We'll see.
It's a mess. It's a mess.
Now, John, you did a great interview with Admiral Stavridis, former
I think
NATO.
they prepared a few minutes, 2 minutes out of a 10-minute interview, through 2.5 minutes, whatever. And it's a teaser for this is going to be on Sunday morning. And Admiral Stavridis was the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO for 4 years. And the last few days, all the NATO countries were in Washington having a conference. Let's see what Admiral Stavridis has to say. Admiral James Stavridis, he was the retired 4-star admiral in the U.S. Navy, but over and above that, Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. Now, is the world going to survive? You were in charge of NATO, and you were in charge of the whole world just about for 4 years. The last few days, there was the NATO conference in Washington. Give us your analysis.
Yeah, I came away feeling pretty optimistic about NATO. NATO 1.0 would have been the Cold War. And, of course, who won that? We did. NATO came out strong. NATO 2.0, I think, is the war on terror after the horrific attacks here, 9/11. The NATO treaty was invoked, and that's why all of our European partners came with us into the war on terror in Afghanistan and Iraq and other places around the world. Now, John, we're kind of in NATO 3.0, and I'd say this is the strongest NATO's ever been. My evidence would be it's gone from 12 nations when it was founded to 32 nations today. Those 32 nations represent half of the world's gross domestic product. We've got 800, the admirals say this, 800 major warships at sea. We've got 15,000 combat aircraft, huge capability. So that alliance is NATO 3.0, and it's standing up to Vladimir Putin as he tries to conquer a country in Europe. First time we've seen a massive invasion like that since the Second World War. For one, I'm glad that NATO exists and we're standing up to Putin.
What's going to happen in Ukraine? Is there somebody going to make peace, or are they going to wait for a new president to go in to find out who they're going to deal with?
it is the latter. I think we're going to see a essentially static combat situation there through the summer and the fall. There'll be an election in the U.S. But here's the punchline, John. I think whether we have a Democrat or a Republican in the White House, either party is going to put pressure on Ukraine to negotiate. The idea that we can simply continue to provide tens of billions of dollars is unsustainable. I think there'll be some nuanced differences, perhaps, between a Republican president and a Democratic president, but I think both sides will want the Ukrainians to negotiate. I think Putin is already sending signals he'll be ready to negotiate.
And I can't wait to hear the whole interview, John.
Well, the whole interview will be on Sunday morning at 9:05 at 9 o'clock. And now we're going to toss to a break, and we're going to come back with Larry Kudlow, the country's number one economist, and a lot of things happening. The bank stocks are making money, and, well, who knows? We'll hear from Larry Kudlow.
A common sense recap of the day's biggest stories. It's John Catsimatidis and Rita Cosby. Katz and Cosby on 77 WABC.
Well, we are back, and so many things are happening. J.P. Morgan made a ton of money. Bank of America made money. Wells Fargo was close to making money. I don't know, and people are saying interest rates may go down. Well, it's an election year. I don't want to tell Larry Kudlow I told you so. Larry Kudlow, the leading economist of the country. Larry, what is your gut feeling?
John, you've been telling me so for 2 years. At some point, you might get it.
A clock is right twice a day, even if it's broken.
I'm just kidding. I love you. On that point, look, I will say this. Inflation has eased down in recent months, but the year-to-year change is still way above their target. I mean, the CPI is 3% plus, the core is 3.5%. The target is 2%, and I don't think there's any rush for them. And if they do it in September, for example, I mean, the futures markets are predicting lower rates now for several years incorrectly. But if you run it in September, it's going to look very, very political. And Trump will not be happy with that. And it compromises the Fed's reputation. So they better be damn careful because they have not hit their target yet. They've hit it for a couple of months, yes, but they have not hit the 12-month change. They have not hit it for several quarters in a row. And let's not forget that the level of prices has gone up 20% during Mr. Biden's term, with energy prices up nearly 40% and groceries over 20%. So I would be very cautious on that. I know the stock market is rallying, but your point about the banks is a good point, John, because, bank stocks are very important, and I think they're in pretty good shape, at least for the large banks, and that's a healthy sign. And there's some diversification going on from the big tech companies out a little bit into commodities and industrials, which might be good. On the other hand, to be honest with you, the stock market may be predicting a Trump victory, and Trump's going to be good to corporations and deregulation and cutting taxes. And I want to say the Trump platform that came out Monday was the growthiest platform in 44 years since Ronald Reagan. The growthiest Republican platform in 44 years since Reagan. I mean, it was a thing of beauty with low taxes and deregulation and drill, baby, drill, and keeping the dollar as the world's reserve currency. Really a terrific platform. I want to make that point. And
I wonder who helped write it.
Well, it was, a lot of people have input. He himself, by the way, took a pretty good pencil to one of the earlier drafts that some of us had contributed to. The other thing I want to say is Joe Biden's going to be the Democratic nominee. I mean, barring some major awful health development, which I do not want, you know.
Well, if he was in Russia, he'd fall out of the fifth floor.
That's very good. But there's, you know, he's going to be at the top of the ticket. And his problem is, yes, he has cognitive issues, but his problem is he's a big government socialist. They're running the Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, spend, tax, regulate, electric vehicles in China, the open borders, a catastrophe, law and order is shot, lawfare is folded. I mean, that's his problem. His problem is his issues are highly unpopular. That's his problem. It's not just the cognitive issues. But right now he owns the machinery, and barring a terrible health accident, which I do not wish for him, I wouldn't wish for anybody, barring a terrible accident, he's going to be the nominee. I've been saying that. I continue to say that. But I love the Trump platform. 20 bullets. That's all it is. 20 bullets. You got to go and look at it. It's the growthiest platform since Reagan in 1980.
Ed Cox?
So, Larry, inflation's at about 3%.
Yes.
The growth in the economy in first quarter is 1 point something. Again, the second quarter will be 1 point something percent on an annualized basis.
Yes.
Does that mean that we have, in real terms, negative growth?
No, because those 1.3s are after inflation. Now, I have a different spin on it, though. When you get down to 1 to 2% growth, again, after inflation, in the old days, in the economics profession, we used to call it a growth recession. And there's no question the consumer is slipping badly. Housing is in the tank. Manufacturing continues to decline. Consumer confidence was out today. The Michigan Sentiment Index fell again. That thing's around 60. During the Trump years, it was over 100. So people don't seem to have much confidence. I wouldn't want to make a recession call right now. I would just make a major slowdown call. I think that's, you know, what stimulus exists is government spending and government jobs. It's not the private sector. It's the government. And that is unhealthy and it's unsustainable. And so if the Federal Reserve comes in and starts pumping, you know, money into the economy, they're chasing politics, to tell you the truth. That's why I think it would be a very big mistake. The unemployment rate has gone from 3.4 to 4.0, I think, or 4.1. I think it's 4.0. If the unemployment rate gets to 4.5 in the next couple of months, or even 5, that would be a recession call. And we've got several more jobs reports between now and Election Day.
I thought the inflation rate year to year from last June to this June was like 3%. And,
yes.
And they were saying that, well, 3%, my feeling is it might be enough not to allow some of our 675 banks on the watch list to go bankrupt.
Well, look, John, that's a credit issue. Okay, that's a bank supervision issue. That's not a monetary policy issue.
But it's overall economy.
Not necessarily. These banks are behemoths, and they make money even when certain of their divisions are losing money. They have, I have a lot of friends. I have lunches and dinners with the Bank of America and J.P. Morgan. You know, they're so diversified now. And they just passed their stress test. They just passed the stress test.
I'm talking about the 675 mama and papa banks around the country that depend on real estate. And since real estate industry is going to crap because of the high interest rates, they're going to go bankrupt and they're going to be eaten up by the big banks.
Well, let's see what happens on that score. That's a forecast.
Thank you. Larry Kudlow, I'll be listening to you. Are you on this weekend from 10 to 1?
Of course I am.
I will be listening to you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. On WABC is the number one show from 10 o'clock on Saturday mornings to 1 o'clock. And after that, from 1 to 3, Steve Moore, Larry Kudlow's well, you're teaching, Mr. Moore.
Steve Moore is a good man.
He's a good man.
Thank
you so much, and we'll be listening to you tomorrow. Thank you so much. And Rita, you got some from Goya Foods, the hot news of the day?
It's the top news of the day, sponsored by Goya. Here's Rita Cosby.
And here are some of the big headlines. Former President Obama and Nancy Pelosi have met privately to talk about President Biden's 2024 campaign. CNN reports that both Obama and the ex-House Speaker Pelosi expressed worries about Biden's mental fitness and how difficult it will be for him to beat Donald Trump. CNN reporters also spoke with over a dozen members of Congress and people in touch with Obama and Pelosi, and many have allegedly said the end of Biden's candidacy feels near. Again, that's according to CNN. Also, AT&T believes a hacker has stolen records of calls. This is really scary. And texts also from almost all of its wireless customers. The company announced this morning that the stolen data, however, doesn't include the content of calls or texts or personal information like social security number or birth dates, just which numbers a customer interacted with and how long the call lasted. And finally, the jury right now is deliberating in the Senator Bob Menendez corruption trial. Jurors have to say yay or nay to 16 felony counts involving bribery allegations. And those are the big headlines of the day.
You're commuting home with Katz and Cosby. Now, here's John Katzimatidis and Rita Cosby on 77 WABC.
And we are back here on Katz and Cosby. Everybody, of course, talking about President Biden's press conference that we were describing, very manicured, if you will. And joining us now is Congressman Mike Lawler of the great state of New York. Congressman, your reaction, first of all, to President Biden. Everybody's talking about it today.
Well, President Putin and Vice President Trump certainly is listening to the press conference. Look, it's obviously it's sad. You're watching the decline of someone who's been in office for nearly 50 years. And, you know, Democrats and the media gaslit the country for years now about his cognitive abilities. And, you know, obviously the American people saw what they saw over 2 weeks ago during that debate, and you can't unring that bell. But now what you're seeing is Democrats who are in panic mode about their own electoral chances, throwing him under the bus. Faster than the speed of sound. You know, and, you know, that's really what this is coming down to now, because they're seeing the polls start to come back in these swing states and swing districts. And so the calls for him to step down are growing louder and louder.
You know, I think about what a contrast it is now, because yesterday was supposed to be the sentencing date for Donald Trump. Of course, the Supreme Court said, look, there is immunity. There is some form of presidential immunity. A lot of the stuff got delayed. And look at what a difference a few weeks make. And now we're heading into the RNC. I'm going to be there, by the way, in Milwaukee. I'm sure you will be, Congressman. It'll be, and Ed, I'm sure too, of course.
Sure will.
And you know, what a difference. Here is a unified Republican Party. You see DeSantis, who I think will be speaking, a number of others that it's like the Republican Party is now so cohesive. And then you've got the implosion on the other end. Your thoughts, Congressman?
Well, obviously they're in full-fledged panic mode about trying to get President Biden to drop out of the race. But here's the bottom line: the facts and the issues don't change. The Biden administration, the Biden-Harris administration, has given us record inflation, skyrocketing costs of groceries, of energy, of housing. The average cost of a mortgage in my district went up $1,000 per month. That's over $12,000 per year increase.
Wow.
That is a direct result of their disastrous policies. You look at the crisis at our southern border. Over 10 million migrants crossing into this country, most of them illegally. You look at the world right now, it's a tinderbox. That is because of Joe Biden's policies. And so they can change out Joe Biden in a week, in 2 weeks at their convention. It's still not going to erase the disastrous impact of the Biden-Harris agenda. And, ultimately, the one other thing I'd say is if they try to jump, let's say Joe Biden does stand down and they try to jump over Kamala Harris, their party will implode. After all the years of identity politics, to jump over the first woman black president, their party would absolutely splinter.
Yeah, no question. You brought up the border. I cannot believe this, Congressman Mike Lawler, that all but 5 Democrats voted against the act that would make sure that only U.S. citizens can vote in federal elections. That who would vote against that? That to me is astounding.
It was truly remarkable, and their basis in doing so is this is already the law. This is irrelevant. It doesn't matter. It's already the law. Well, why not just reaffirm it? Why not just codify it, as Democrats always like to do? At the end of the day, we've seen in New York City, we've seen in Washington, D.C., a push to allow non-citizens to vote in elections, including foreign diplomats. It's absolutely outrageous. Our elections are for U.S. citizens to vote in and to determine the future and the outcome of local, state, and federal elections. And this bill is a bill that should become law. It passed the House overwhelmingly. But let's see what Chuck Schumer and Senate Democrats do. My guess is they'll let it die like they do everything else that has gone from the House to the Senate and do nothing.
Yeah, just like the Mayorkas. Remember the whole Mayorkas impeachment? Judge Weinberg, they wouldn't even do anything with that.
Mike, it's Richard Weinberg. I think it's absolutely shameless that Schumer can hold that up and not bring it to the floor for a vote. Those people should be called on. All 100 senators should be called on to vote, and they should vote the right way to make sure that only citizens vote in federal elections. What do you say?
This is what Chuck Schumer does. I mean, my bill, the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, to combat anti-Semitism on college campuses, passed the House 320 to 91, and Chuck Schumer, the highest-ranking Jewish official in American history, sitting on the bill because of politics, because he's concerned it'll divide Democrats. It's unconscionable. This is what he does. H.R. 2, same thing. Border Security Act. He sat on it for months, wouldn't do anything with it. This bill is just another in a long line of bills that Chuck Schumer sits on.
Well, you get the word out of here's all the ones who said we don't need to make sure that only U.S. citizens vote. I mean, that list should be out there far and wide for everybody to see. Every American cares about election integrity. So
every New York Democrat voted against prohibiting non-citizens, prohibiting illegal immigrants from voting in our elections.
Wow, I'm glad you're getting the word out. Thank you so much, Congressman Mike Lawler. We'll see you in Milwaukee. Thank you.
Absolutely, look forward to it.
Me too. Thanks so much. And John, we have Dr. Mark Siegel now.
Oh, Dr. Mark Siegel. Well, he is one smart guy. And Mark Siegel, am I going to see you at breakfast tomorrow?
No, yes, actually.
All right. Okay, I don't want you to miss breakfast.
I'm not out east yet, but yeah.
I'm not either. I'm going to fight that Long Island Expressway tonight.
Oh, I'm not. Oh my God, maybe I better come in your car.
Dr. Mark Siegel, tell us. President Biden was on Thursday night. What do you think? I mean, people are still trying to figure it out.
Well, I think the issue here is that we're not getting full disclosure on the part of the administration, the doctors that are taking care of him, and of course the first family. And I think that the media is making a big mistake rushing to diagnoses and to tests that should be done. I'm tired of that. That we had that all through the COVID pandemic. I think the thing to focus on is the patient's doctor, the president's doctor is not coming forward. And we also don't need to be having the president under a microscope to figure out if his errors are significant or not, because we've seen enough already. We've seen enough. There's enough examples of these lapses and disorientation and spatial disorientation and forgetting people's names and who people are and not getting to the end of a sentence. All of that is significant. It's been going on for years. It's getting worse, and it needs to be investigated. I feel sorry for the president, actually, because he's also in a state of denial over it, which is very typical of this kind of a thing.
You know, Dr. Siegel, one of the things that was amazing last night was when he said, and this is the president's own words, that no doctor has told him he needs a neurological test outside of this annual exam that he gets. The last one, I think it's either end of January or February, was the annual exam. I feel like saying, he said, yeah, if somebody told me that, if a doctor told me I needed a neurological exam, I'd take one, but no one's told me that. I mean, to me, I thought medical malpractice.
Well, again, that's like third hand from the president, who we don't know if he's telling the truth. Let me answer that in a generic way. If I see a patient who's disoriented or who simply forgets who the current president of France is and mentions somebody from years ago, or says, my son died in Iraq and I know that they died of a brain tumor, and that became the whole impetus of a tremendous move called, the cancer moonshot, I would get them worked up. And what is the standard workup for this kind of discombobulation? Let's just call it discombobulation. What's the standard workup? It's a scan of the brain, and it's not this cognitive test. Everybody keeps saying cognitive test. It would be neuropsychological testing, which is several hours to figure this out. Now, you might not do all of that on grandpa. Rita, you might not do all that on grandpa, but you're going to do that with someone where cognition really matters. And I'll tell you a subtle thing. I don't care about what time zone he's in. If somebody is going through 15 time zones and they get a sudden phone call that there's a bombing somewhere or something, I want them to know what time zone they're in when they answer the call, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. What do you make of the fact that he was saying that no doctor, I mean, do you believe that? You just brought up, you hit exactly what I thought, Dr. Siegel, was that either he's not telling the truth or these doctors are insulating him, because even after the debate, how could you not, to me, say you're the White House doctor. Wouldn't you say, we need to give you a neurological exam after that debate? I mean, he's making it sound like no one's even suggested that.
I think that it's not a neurological exam. It's a neurologist who takes this seriously, comes up with a workup, and the workup reveals something. Has it occurred to you, Rita, that maybe they did all of that and they don't want to release the results?
Absolutely. I agree with you. Absolutely. That clearly is one option.
And that's why you got Judge Weinberg there. But I actually want to say I don't believe this Dr. O'Connor is absolutely lying on any medical record. I think the judge is going to agree with me. Absolutely. When this doctor says he doesn't have Parkinson's, they ruled that out, because he's not going to put that word there. Then the media goes crazy, and they act like they don't even understand.
He's got something. Whatever he has something.
He has something, but it isn't Parkinson's. He has something worse. John, he has something worse. I mean, Parkinson's is actually treatable. Yeah. I think he has a progressive cognitive decline that's due to something. My theory is that it's related to the irregular heartbeat he has. Atrial fibrillation can lead to inadequate blood flow to the brain. Over time, you get vascular dementia.
Doctor, we got to take a break. Dr. Mark Siegel, I'm buying breakfast tomorrow. I'll see you in the morning.
You're always buying breakfast.
Thank you so much. And now let's take a break right now, and we're going to come back with Andy McCarthy.
Yeah, he's got some big news on the Trump legal front.
It's a common sense recap of the big stories. It's Katz and Cosby on 77 WABC.
And we are back here on Katz and Cosby, and joining us now is Andy McCarthy, of course, the former assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York. And Andy, of course, President Trump has had some really interesting news. A lot came from the Supreme Court that could have a huge impact, especially on the New York case. Explain, because there's some new filings that they did, and you think there may be some good points behind it.
Oh, I sure do, Rita. I think the most attention that any case got at the end of the Supreme Court's term was, of course, the immunity case. And there is some crossover between what the court found in that case, which is that if you're talking about a president's official acts that are part of his executive responsibilities, the president has immunity for those, especially if they're at the core of his responsibilities. And the district attorney, Alvin Bragg, and his prosecutors in the case did use evidence of some of former President Trump's official acts. Specifically, they claimed, or they had Michael Cohen, testify that Trump told him that Jeff Sessions, who was then the attorney general, that basically Trump had directed him to put the kibosh on a campaign finance investigation into Cohen and David Pecker that Trump was implicated in. So obviously, if that happened, that's part of the president's core responsibilities, and he'd have immunity for that. But I think the biggest thing is a different case that the court decided a few days before the immunity case, a case called Erlinger, in which they reaffirmed the principle that the important findings in a criminal case have to be made by a jury unanimously. And in this case, of course, Judge Merchan allowed the jury to convict former President Trump in connection with a crime where he told them they didn't need to be unanimous on the most important part of it.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. Judge Weinberg.
Andy, I think that's actually incredibly correct. And you had a great column where you talked about that. And you also have the Fisher case, which dealt with the overcharging and the bootstrapping. You know, it seems to me your column made a very good point, which is if Merchan wants to do the right thing, he should be ordering an acquittal here.
Yeah, I don't know, other than what we were able to see, what kind of guy this guy is, Judge. It would seem to me that he's got a very, very, I think even before these cases came out, he's got a very high percentage chance of being reversed by the appellate courts in New York. People keep saying, well, let's get to the Supreme Court. It shouldn't have to get to the Supreme Court. The first court that looks at it, there's about 12 reasons to throw this thing out. And I know how politicized this was and how badly they wanted to be able to call Trump a convicted felon in the run-up to the election. But most judges, you could speak to this better than anyone can. Judges don't like to get reversed. It's embarrassing to get reversed.
Well, Hunter Biden is running the gates at the White House. He's a convicted felon now, too, right?
Hasn't been sentenced yet.
Well, technically, John, none of them are convicted felons.
Right, until.
Yeah, until.
Right.
A different question, and I know you're not a bankruptcy lawyer. Today, the federal bankruptcy judge threw out Rudy Giuliani's bankruptcy case. Now, is that good for Rudy or bad for Rudy?
Well, it's bad for Rudy in the sense that I believe he sought bankruptcy protection. So obviously, if you're the person there's a couple of different ways that, people end up in bankruptcy court. Sometimes their creditors hold them in there. But other times people are seeking to reorganize. I think most of the time people are seeking to reorganize their own lives when they've gotten into deep financial trouble. And I think that was the case with Rudy, mainly because of this defamation case down in Georgia, where he's looking at, big time fines. So if you're looking for a court to give you bankruptcy relief so that you can reorganize and pay some portion of your debts, and the court says no, then obviously that's not an outcome that you want to have.
Understood. I don't think anybody understands the process if it was good or bad for Rudy. That's why I asked you.
Well, I'm a lawyer, but I have more familiarity with being bankrupt.
Ed Cox, any questions?
Yeah, I was just follow up on Judge Weinberg's issue. With respect to the Bragg case, didn't the J6 cases that the Supreme Court decided really bear on it, where they took the Enron law out of context and applied it to a riot? Doesn't that also apply to the Bragg case? And
it doesn't apply to the Bragg case, but it does apply to the January 6th case, the federal prosecution that Jack Smith, the special counsel, brought in Washington. 2 of the 4 counts in that case are the same obstruction statute that the court dealt with in the case you're talking about, Fisher. And the other interesting thing I'd point out is, there are judges, former attorneys general Ed Meese and Mike Mukasey have filed an amicus brief challenging the constitutionality of Jack Smith's status as a special counsel. In the immunity case, Justice Thomas wrote a concurrence in which he says he doesn't think that Smith constitutionally is a special counsel. So that issue is thrumming along as well.
Wow.
I was just making the point that with the Bragg case, weren't the records law with respect to New York taken out of context here and made into a bigger case, and therefore the law, again, like the Enron law,
it was a stretch.
Was
the prosecutor was stretching, overreaching, and stretching.
It was an unprecedented use of what really is a consumer protection statute that they. This was in the civil fraud case. They took a consumer protection statute and they applied it to Trump in a context that had never been applied to someone. And in the criminal case, the Bragg case, what they did was they took a misdemeanor falsification of business records and they turned it into a felony by saying that he was trying to conceal a second crime. And the second crime is the one where I point out that the judge told the jury they didn't need to be unanimous on the main finding in that crime.
And we just have a few seconds left. Are we ever going to get the tapes, you think, from Garland on Biden and Robert Hur? Real quick, what do you think?
I think if we have a Republican Justice Department in January, we may hear them. Wow. Other than that, I doubt it.
Yeah, I agree with you. Andy, thank you. We love having you here, Andy. Thank you so much.
Great weekend. Thank you.
You too. Thank you so much. And what do we all stand for, guys?
Truth, justice, and the American way.
God bless America.
Maybe Superman.